Recording. So hello everyone, welcome for on the next Architecture Weekly and GitHub sponsors conjoint webinar. Today we have a special guest, Alexey Zimarev, the man, the legend, that doesn't need to have any introduction, but jokes aside, Alexey will be showing us his experience while building Eventus, so his event sourcing framework. So we'll learn whether you really need or you don't need event sourcing framework and why this has to be Eventus. So thank you, Alexey. You can go ahead. I will.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Oscar. And I'm a bit, flattered by this. Basically, it's let's see how this presentation goes and what kind of discussion we can have afterwards. I started building Eventus out of despair, more or less, right? Because I was doing things I was building production system using event sourcing for quite a while. And I've seen things, and together with Oscar, I worked, and I still do, work as a developer advocate for Event Story. And as you, Oscar, know, we talk to customers, and we also saw and hear things, heard things. So, and I keep hearing them. And it's like, based on this, I feel there is a need for something. And as you, Oscar, built or participating in maintaining Martin, I think you feel the same. So let me just share the screen and see. Slide deck. It's deliberately white, so it's not a glitch. When we start going around and search for information about event sourcing, although it took me a while to find this tweet, Greg Young, who popularized the pattern, he kept saying, want to know event sourcing? It's left fold, right? And this tweet is almost, it will be 10 years old soon, yeah, but Greg talks about it for much longer than that. It's just the left fold. A small print, whatever it means, because not all of us are functional programmers, not all of us have a mathematical background, and people not usually, in a lot of cases, they don't know what left fold means. At the same time, okay, it's very simple and it's straightforward. There is no hard stuff in there, but when you search for event sourcing, you also find articles like this. Don't let the internet dupe you, event sourcing is hard. And if you ever search Google event sourcing, this comes on the first or maybe now on the second page, right? So clearly there is some disagreement in the community, outside the community. Is it hard? Is it easy? Is it useful? Is it not? Because some people say, oh, it's so complicated, you'd rather not use it until you have very special needs, right? We also find diagrams like that where people promote very, basically the one on the left is taken from the book Microservices Closure and uses an example diagram in an article. Don't let the internet dupe you, event sourcing is hard. And whatever I tried, I couldn't find this particular diagram as an example of event sourcing, but nevertheless, it is not exactly what we usually mean by event sourcing. But there are a bunch of diagrams on, like I showed on the right. That's kind of bring you to the wrong place relatively quickly. And I did some runs in Twitter, and people usually tag along and post their own examples. So these things are not exactly right. This is not how you should do event sourcing. There is also a push from vendors. And this is probably something you have seen, or if you haven't seen it, you recognize the style. This diagram is from Confluent documentation, and this is an example diagram from their article about event sourcing. Of course, they do event sourcing with Kafka, because Kafka is the product they sell. There's clearly commercial interest in there. So how does it really go? And I found a story in an internet unlimited space about someone trying to implement event sourcing. And this is the slide. We went for a quite classic event sourcing plus CQRS stack. And this is like classic stack, okay. Command, slide ban act, persistent actors, wow, okay. Event storage, Kafka, and a query side Elasticsearch. Honestly, I build event source systems for a living for quite a while, but I've never seen a stack like that. Especially, I've never seen anyone before who calls it a classic stack or quite classic stack. So it was a big shock for me. It's like, you're getting into troublesome territory with this classic stack, right? At least for me, it was pretty clear. And this is the thing, right? Developing the system went well. Building it is cool, trendy topic. Lots and lots of tutorials. Apparently, there are tutorials about how to use that particular stack for events for systems. The team could do it. The system was built. The user started using it, and almost everything went well. And then, but after some time in production, right? And this is the first line. That's very important thing. And this is, I can rant about it forever. Most tutorials focus on so-called day zero or day one problems, detection, inception. When a system is live for more than a week, there are day one, day two problems or day plus one problems, because there are things that you will never be able to catch in the test because the tests were not designed to catch that particular issues. So you weren't aware that this issue exists because tutorials never cover it. And why is that so? Because tutorials usually engage you well, spark your interest. That's also my problem with a lot of conference talk. It's a good thing, right? They do a decent job to spark the interest and expect you to dive into the topic. But then in many cases, you try to dive into the topic and then you find more tutorials that cover the zero problem. But it's very hard to find information on certain topics, unlike more traditional architectures like using relational database persistence or architectural patterns, design patterns. There are quite deep, a substantial amount of information and literature around this. In event sourcing, unfortunately, still not like that yet. So this slide, I didn't know it will be there, but I wasn't surprised it's there because choosing that particular stack and saying, okay, we look through all the tutorials, they face exactly the same issue that I faced myself before, and I see a lot of people facing today. So what happens now? They run into a bunch of issues. They manage to solve it, but in many cases, people are not that lucky. What happens is they try it, they feel enlightened and basically, empowered by the pattern because it brings a lot of goodness into the design process and implementation. But then they fail and they write the blog post, right? And this is the typical story, like you go there, you try something out, you think it's great, everything works, you hit production, the incidents just pile up, users aren't happy, the management presses on you, you made the wrong decision, you chose the wrong pattern, you try to fix it with duct tape and glue and whatever, sticks everywhere. And out of a sudden, the team say, enough is enough, we're going to refactor it to use more traditional persistent style or whatever you call it, architecture or design principle. And I find it pretty depressing because event sourcing doesn't need to be like that, right? With the right approach, with the right tools in hand, it can be a very pleasant experience also in production, particularly in production. So you see, this is what happens. This is the reply on the previous tweet, underwhelmed with event sourcing. So yeah, where is this? This tweet is not particularly popular, and you see it's also old, and it's even tweeted from BlackBerry, which doesn't exist anymore. The thing is, without a helping hand, it's not easy to start sometimes, especially when there is not much material around. The first attempt from my side to kind of solve this was this book, and I know that some of you have read it. It was the demand from the publisher was to write the major redesign book, and I was pretty, suffered a bit from imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not a DDD expert as such. Like, I can advise people on DDD. Some people say I am a DDD expert, but I don't think there are any DDD expert at all in the world because the nature of things. But I try to squeeze in event sourcing there because I just love it, and I think they go very well hand in hand together. But you cannot find event sourcing on the cover of the book, right? And that's why a lot of people searching for event sourcing book will never stumble upon my book. And when they see .NET Core, which apparently doesn't exist anymore, they would be dragged away from this. And when they see the publisher name, please don't share this in public, Oscar, this video, they will be dragged away from the book again. So triple drag away, and sometimes people just ignore it, which I understand. It's fine.
But I made an initial dry run to make it also
Yes,
working with the.
Yes, you did.
At least one chapter.
Yeah, so I think it's not hard actually. So, but nevertheless, the book is a different story. So, but then the thing is, okay, you maybe read my book, and the code in the book is pretty decent. It can be refactored to build something, and what happens is you get a feeling like it's not that hard, right? So there are some of the pitfalls of event sourcing, or like expected problems that you're gonna get in production, and even before production, explained in the book. But the book space is just as much, right? It's almost 500 pages. And it's not an event sourcing book. That's why I couldn't put all the stuff that I want to put in there, just because I can't squeeze it in. It will become a full-fledged event sourcing book, which was not an intention of the publisher. So there are a bunch of things, maybe a same amount of material that's not covered there, but you get an impression maybe that's what I should have made more explicit, like it's just a start, right? But I feel like sometimes a bit, how to say this, guilty. It's like I gave people impression that they can do it. And some people go, okay, I didn't read Alexey's book. I go to the Greg Young's Simplest Possible Thing repository. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's pretty old. But I remember Alberto Brandolini during the workshop in the company I used to work for, and he said, okay, I'm the Java guy, but if you want to use .NET, let's start with this. So he actually assumed that the code is usable there. Before it used to have like a shitty database class. Now it's gone, but it used to be there. So it was not exactly production ready code. And this is how it looks like, right? So there are not that many things you need in a foundation. So just, base class for aggregate root, base class for an entity, exceptions you can ignore, and some other abstractions. Oh, this is mine. It's not what's it called, MR. I think MR. I'm gonna show it to you. That's the one that's being increased the size. So that's the thing, simple CQRS. They all it's a very basic set of abstractions and example code of doing something concrete. Like commands are real. It's not abstraction over the command, because you should never put an abstraction in a command. And there is one, of course. I think Greg will regret it. Nevertheless, but there is one thing here. Anyone notice it? It's called infrastructure crap. Don't bother looking there, because everything here is pretty small, right? Okay, fake bus, maybe it's not that small, but this infrastructure crap is going on and on and on and on and on. And I bet you money that that's not really like covering a lot of advanced things. It just tries to do the pattern matching, poor man pattern matching, because there was no C#9 at the time. The thing is that there are a lot of bits and pieces like that when you try to implement event sourcing from scratch. This infrastructure crap that you don't need to bother looking at, in fact, exists. And it doesn't need to be crap. It could be pretty beautiful, but it's still in structure. So let me go back in here. And then we go on. If you start building your stuff, right? Even in my book, this is what I started with. Maybe several classes. How many? 10 maybe, excluding CS profile and the exception file. Suddenly, the chapter 14 or something, or there is no chapter 14, sorry, 13 or 12, it grows. So it has now about 20 classes, not all of them fit on the screen. Oh, this continuation here. And I call all useful, right? And it just covers still the basics because, like I said, you can use it as a baseline for production grade code, but it's still a baseline, right? So there are not that many things that's covering advanced topics. And after 6 months, you end up with something like this. This is the real stuff from the company I work for today, apart from Event Store. We started building it, and it started with this. It doesn't fit on the screen, Box Framework, which is the base event sourcing class, and we added things. Like we support Event Store version 5 TCP protocol. We support Event Store DB, gRPC. We added some hosting, we added some diagnostics, we added some messaging, traces, logging, MongoDB, and blah, 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 it just grows, right? And guess what? This is not the first exercise I've done. I don't know exactly how many I had in my past, but there is another one, right? I removed the company name because I don't think they will be happy if I share it. It looks pretty similar, right? So you basically end up building the same thing all over again. And of course, I love this company. So I'm wondering if what kind of state this framework or set of libraries are now in. Maybe they ditched it altogether and refactored to use MongoDB or SQL for persistence. I don't know. Because when you build it, you don't think about documentation, you don't think about teaching other people, saying learning by doing is the best way. Just go to my code that works in production and you will learn everything. I don't have time to work with you because I have to do other things, right? I'm not paid to teach you, I'm paid to build these base classes and then also build some services that use them, right? Pretty easy. So that's what I do. I'm a consultant. And again, my experience working with talking to Event Store customers, that they sometimes hire a consultant, work for them for months, 2, 3, maybe 5, and then they leave. And they usually take the knowledge with them, half of it at least, or more, because they never got time to explain you everything you have to be aware of. And they touch the surface somewhere, just putting off the fire, and then they move on to another gig. I observe a situation which is happening maybe like real time right now when a person works for a customer Event Store. Again, should not be public really. I wouldn't mention names, but he believes he made a beautiful work there. And I talked to them 2.5 years ago, and they say, well, you know, it's not that shiny. We hired Greg and someone else to fix this, and then we hired one more. And when I provided them with a suggestion, they said, okay, God damn it, another consultant just pushing their own thing. So they got fed up and they say, we are not rewriting it 3 times. So this is the thing, right? Maintaining this stuff is hard work. Developing this stuff further is hard work. Documenting is double the work because you basically need to force yourself to document it. And what happens when you leave? Or what happens if the person who builds it for you leaves the company? Because it's closed source, you can't really develop it any further unless you know what you're doing. So the result is this, right? I'm just stop ranting and give the slide because that's what I see. People try and then we are usually not paid to solve, to build frameworks. Okay, we can talk about platform teams that should do it. We're paid to build systems that are used by users that pay the company we work for so they can pay a salary, right? They're mainly paid to build to provide value. And building an event sourcing framework is probably the last thing the business wants us to do. But you can still do it, right? That's at least what we believe in, but probably will fail. If you really want to have a performant, maintainable, reasonably scalable, well-documented set of tools that help you moving on your event source systems, it's just because that's not what people usually do in their daily job. And also, like, you will end up stepping on every single, what's it called? I don't remember what's it called. Every trap is, the traps are there in the field, right? The risk is that you will step at each one of them because nobody tells you that there is a trap there. You just walk along the field and you step in a trap and say, shit. And then you walk along a bit more, then you clear another trap, but you pay with your own blood. So I think it's a waste. Like, there are, for many other things, there are lots of tools built, and I thought, okay, we need to I can't do it for all the platforms. Oscar is doing a very good job for providing examples. I try to take a step forward, but I choose a very narrow focus. Like, I'm gonna solve it, at least I think so. I'm very optimistic again. I can do it for .NET. So when you fail, you of course write a blog post. Don't let internet dupe you. Event sourcing is hard. And then the question is like, yeah, we don't need a framework. Like, Jesus Christ, framework create dependency, and we will be always dependent on this. Like, why don't we use a Postgres EDO.NET client? Why do we need Martin, right? We can just shovel JSON-B fields to the database and be forever happy. Why do we need to build to use mass transit if we can just use RabbitMQ client? I literally had this discussion. Why do we need to use login libraries? Why do we need to do this? We can write everything from scratch. Like, okay, next step, maybe we will be writing .NET framework ourselves in C++ or something like that. Basically, because there is a need to, in order to create value faster, you need a certain abstractions and a tooling that supports you doing that, right? If you just nowadays it's easier because if you have .NET, then it provides you a bunch of things, like you can create web APIs and even user interfaces pretty easily. It's not everywhere it's like that, but in .NET we're kind of lucky. But it's not in every field. Like, Microsoft doesn't provide you with any kind of messaging framework or middleware. And of course, they don't even think about event sourcing. If you try to use a RabbitMQ client, right? It's very low level, it's very basic. And then you will end up building the messaging library yourself, because there is no possibility that you will just keep repeating, copy-pasting code that uses the RabbitMQ client. I saw people writing their own logging frameworks and logging things to SQL database, effectively destroying it because it was their main transactional database. So, like, things out there, you need to be aware, and you're not always are aware. And it's not because you're dumb or whatever. It's just that you don't have all the information, all the experience. So, and a world is full of closed source, half-assed libraries that do whatever things they do in presence of the wider range of open source libraries that have a community that do much better job in doing what they promise to do, right? Messaging, advanced database clients like Martin and Event Store abstractions and other things, and login framework, web service, whatever. So you don't need to build it yourself. And that's what I think people should stop talking in event sourcing world. Like, it's easy to grasp, but it's not easy to build. That is, well, it's not easy to build from scratch an event sourcing system which doesn't use any pre-made tooling or internal tooling and consider production ready. It's very cool to take book samples or Oscar samples and build a prototype, but it won't be production ready, I can guarantee you. So what you want is you shovel a ball and you get a strike. But what you might need is a bit of this, right? Some guardrails. You need to be safe. You need to be protected from all the things that might happen, or at least be aware of them and have a solution out of the box that can be implemented quickly, or it's already there. You just need to enable it. And I can't keep calm. I'm fed up and I'm doing this. Okay, If you can't type event-source, I know it's very hard. So you can type event-source in .NET and go to my documentation page, which is intentionally written in sort of, explanatory style. Some people say it looks like a book. Well, I wrote one book, I can write another. So I just express myself in documentation. It has articles too, and there is a Medium publication for Adventures. You can just find it by looking at the name. I won't advertise it, but it has some information that people just read and learn. And someone said, okay, I finally understood what event sourcing is just by reading the docs. Right, the code. Let's look at the code. Because there's a lot of runt, I think. And maybe I need to say, okay, this is what I've done. I close this thing. So I have a sample application, the same organization. If you look at the, let's see. So it has a few repos. There is a Dart version maintained by Kenneth Gulbrandsen, which is, he lives in Norway, just on the west side. And he decided to build an event source library using the ideas from Adventures, and there is Adventures Dart right now. I think it's kind of feature complete, but I don't know Dart, so I couldn't say that much. But there is a sample project, which I think is a good starting point for people to look at. And it's not that hard. Basically, this domain project doesn't contain much of the boilerplate code. I think it contains no boilerplate code at all. So Adventures consists of a set of abstractions, the core abstractions to build a domain model. It has this aggregate thing, which I know Oscar doesn't really like, but I'm considering doing something else in addition to that. It has this dedicated base class for the state, or it's a record because state is immutable. It needs some wiring, everything is behind. That is not a lot of code, but it's very specific code to solve the particular case, right? And in this thing, in the state object, for example, you want to reconstruct state from events. And I give you some tools to do it without doing the having the file that's called infrastructure crap. Don't look here. So it's already there. The infrastructure crap is taken by me. I already wrote this infrastructure crap. You don't need to care about it. It allows you to create value really fast. And I think quite a few things here, the reconstructing value objects, for example, from primitive types in the event, I will work around it. I will have a better way to handle it. So if you look at the application itself, it allows to implement, Adventures allows you with the application service construct to easily implement port and adapters, for example. So if you look at the command API, it basically passes over commands from the HTTP API to the application service. You might add validations. It's completely up to you how it's wrapped in, but the logic actually happens there, which allows you essentially to replace HTTP API by gRPC API, for example, or by messaging API, because the work actually happens in the application service. And if you look at the payment thing, it's even more interesting because, where is it? Yeah, you can also declare a command as a HTTP command. It will be and register it with Adventures, and it will expose an HTTP endpoint using the same construct. It's not exactly. It is quite useful. It is production ready, but there are a couple of features missing, like adding policies, authorization policies to it. But it's very easy to implement, so I have an issue for that. So overall, you see the code is not big. When you start building it, you basically need to say, okay, I'm building my domain model, and I start building my value objects, which doesn't have a base class, it's just a record. It has some events. The mapping between the actual strong type language, the event type in the code, and the event type string, which is used, for example, also. Or do you use it in Martin? I think you do. And in Event Store DB or other implementations of event store, you need to store it as a string, is taken care of, because otherwise you will end up with an anti-pattern using the fully qualified class name, and then you basically lock yourself from refactoring your domain model. So things like that, small stuff everywhere that takes care of things that you don't really, either you don't know about it or you don't want to care about. Projections, right? So like storing checkpoints, receiving events, composing them, composing the projections to a group and with a single checkpoint, passing events over, populating the context, adding metadata. It's all being taken care of, and with a few lines of code, you basically say, okay, I have a projection done. Let's have a look at it. This is the projection to MongoDB. When I receive an event, I just update my document. When I receive an event, I update my document in the way described. And I also, when I published the first version of Adventures, I said, okay, it's very opinionated. And I feel like with time passes by, it becomes less and less opinionated, because there are several ways of doing things. Let's say I have this state object, right? And it has registrations for event handlers. How do you apply your events to mutate a state? But there is no requirement to do so. It's useful because it makes the code smaller and more concise, but it can also override this when function, override when, and do the pattern matching here, because the base function basically calls these handlers. But if you don't want them, you can just use whatever you want, right? Application service is not like that. It basically dictates how you should do things. But okay, you don't have to use the application service. You can inject the aggregate store to your controller and do all the work the application service does for you manually. But there are other things, like when you put event source system into production, you want to trace it. Distributed tracing is an essential thing for any distributed system, and event source systems are by nature distributed because there is a lot of asynchronous processing, especially when it comes to read models. And sometimes people don't get it. They think, okay, I deploy a monolith. How is it distributed? Well, it's not really distributed, but it involves asynchronous message handling, which is so the part of the process becomes distributed. So you do here you handle a command, and then on the other side, it gets projected to read model. And unless you apply distributed tracing, you won't be able to see it. Let me do a quick thing here. I need to check if container is running. I just want to run it and show you some stuff. Bytender is playing tricks with me. Just a sec. So this thing exposes an API, and let me have a look at it. Let's see what happens if I put 465 and then get study Oscar, because I use Alexey usually. Now I'm show courtesy to my host, room ID, room 2, and then I put some other things. Let's just increase the size. €100. Execute. It all went well. And here again, you see that it returns a result and say, okay, command return the result. I had a discussion about it with a sponsor of mine. It's like, why? It's supposed to be fire and forget. Okay, if commands can fail, they need to return something, at least indication of the success. And this is the indication. It returns the mutated state, right? So some applications are built like that. They expect a new state back instead of, so they don't need to require the state. Well, Eventually does it for you by default. It also returns if success is true or false, and it returns a list of events. And every event has an event type. So what you could do is, if you, for example, use like Redux or UX or any other state management or something you built yourself, you can pass it through those reducers and update the state using events. So you extrapolate event sourcing also to the front end. So you don't need to query things. Because one of the things people say, oh, we're dealing with eventual consistency because after you executed the command, we need to query the data. I say, you already have the data. Why do you need to query it? You just received it from me, right? You can just use it in your UI. Things like that are everywhere. But let's have a look at what's the port? Localhost 8. This one. Yeah, of course. Never works. No, sorry. To look at it. Where is it? It's not my code, right? Just remember that it's Zipkin. Just see if it should work. It doesn't produce any logs. Fine. No. No. Try another browser, just in case.
Maybe some issue with the old volume.
No, see, it's the browser issue. Now this is what you get from distributed tracing. You get, I got a command executed, and let's see what it still doesn't work properly. Yeah, here we go. Just expand it a bit. This is why I say distributed. So we see that the command was executed. It took a while. Let me just do another one. So you see it's actually not that bad, because 170 milliseconds look quite extreme. It's because the way our web API works, it does lazy instantiation of something, and then it takes a while to do the first time. So let's find another trace. No, that's the first one. 4 minutes ago, a few seconds ago. Here we go. Right. Yeah, it's already much faster. So the command processing finished here when we, and then you see the whole process. And that's what Eventus also has. It has very deep diagnostics, like an observability things, including some of the traces, or all the things are traced actually, and some metrics that are exposed outside. So your application will be observable by default, and then you can learn about insights in your system pretty easily. The command took whatever time to execute, and it was passing through the service, and then we this is the service, how much time it took. You can easily see the overhead. It's half a millisecond. That's what Eventus adds up, and most of it I think is serialization. So I don't do crazy things there. And here we append an event, and that's the most time spent. For some reason, it's a bit slow. But then the subscription kicks in. Subscription kicks in just after the event has been appended, because subscriptions are synchronous. So I subscribe to event streams and I get this afterwards. And then it starts a asynchronous consumption process. So it passes this event over to the consumer pipeline, and this pipeline can be parallelized. It could be partitioned and stuff like that. And you can see that after this, there are 2 projections being triggered. It's a Roombook projection, and that's the handler. Oh, where is the second one? That's a booking update. Oh, that's my booking projection, room booked. Yeah. So basically, it says, okay, the message type is room booked. Both it's a resource path, but there are 2 handlers in the same subscription in a subscription group. This one updates the document. This one as well, but these traces are coming from one go. Nevertheless, you can see the whole thing, and if you don't apply distributed tracing, the best you can see is these 3 operations, right? Because they are nested. In order to see the full thing, you need to propagate distributed context across the wire, and that's what Adventures does for you. So there is something else I wanted to show. I have some stuff. Let's have a look at Events30b. Localhost. Stream browser. Yeah, I have some streams from before. Yeah, I can demonstrate this. It's a bit off topic, right? But it's a pretty good thing, pretty good demo. So we have this booking 456, right? It's booked, it's unpaid, it's €100, and what we could do right now in Swagger, let's do 456. 6, and then we pay €50, and we do the payment ID, payment 1, and it's paid by small one. Right, and then we see again that the state has changed. The outstanding amount is now €50, and it's still not paid. And we have 1 event dependent. Cool. I try to do more. So the idea here is, as I haven't found it elsewhere. I think there is something similar in Akka.net in PentaBridge. They have a tool that basically looks at your application, having the knowledge about how it's built. I think it's very powerful to know, to understand if application is built with something. Let's say it's built with Adventures. You can build an API that would use the DI container, all the primitive or abstractions that Adventures brings, or any other library in this sense, and inspect the application from the outside. I don't know if I expressed myself clear, but let's say I have three implementations of Event Store, right? It's Event Store DB, Postgres, which is not compatible with Martin. Postgres still needs to do it, and SQL Server, right? Here I show you the stream browser in Event Store DB, which shows me all the events here. And then let's have a look at this one. You can see the second event coming. What if I use SQL Server? I would need to open the SQL Management Studio or Azure Data Studio, go to that table, which I still need to find, and look at a JSON payload to understand what it is. It doesn't have this nice stream browser, right? One of other things that I saw is people say, okay, I have 2 events, right? But what is my state now? How I can look at something like SQL database table and understand what my booking looks like. Of course, right after you execute this request, you get a piece of state back, right? The whole state. It tells you everything. But as soon as you execute the next command, you get a new state. But it's like, okay, you close the Swagger window or the UI. It's like, what is my state? I want to have a state. We have the state obsession. We want to know what the data. And from events, as good as they are, we only know the behavior. So what people usually do, 2 things. They create a projection just to project the state. So read model essentially it represents the aggregate state. I find it quite useful, but I still think like it's a second, or yeah, I might call it anti-pattern. I hate this word, but because it implies that you should never do it. I think read models are useful for different purposes, and projecting the aggregate state is not one of them. Just to look at it. You see where I'm going? So like, what is state of the booking now? Can you see it by looking at the stream? Not really, right? Who's the guest? Oh, I need to look here in the first event. And stuff like that. It's a very simple one. It has just a few fields. And events, there's just, we have 2 events, so it's pretty easy to maybe figure out going back by going back and forth. But it's not always like that. Some aggregates have a long life cycle. They might have hundreds of events, right? And what is the state at the end of the stream? People do crazy things. They just set up a debugging endpoint in the command handler, and then when the aggregate is loaded, they look at the state. It's pretty tedious. And right now, especially when you have no interface like that, like to look at a SQL database and query events by aggregate ID, something like that. So what I built is this. It's called Spyglass. What I could do, and it's in the cloud, so I can't really type in localhost because it's hosted there. It needs to call my API. So I need to expose this endpoint somehow through the internet or to the internet sorts. So I use ngrok. You know what ngrok is? It's a proxy tunnel. And it's free. And because my application is running in the local environment and the environment is set to development, it says Spyglass API is not secured. So don't do it in prod. Running insecure without API security. And I can connect to it. Because I know how the application is built, I look at your aggregates, for example. I can find more. It's just the first version that I built in a few days. Okay, I have an aggregate. If I have 2, it will pop up here as well. It has these methods that basically encapsulate your logic. Events that are produced by the aggregate apply to its state, and these are events applied to the state. It could be more of those. And here's the best part. If you go to 456 and say load, just show the stream, completely agnostic to what kind of store you use, because I don't call your event store DB here, right? I don't call SQL Server. I call your application, and your application knows what store it uses. It knows what serialization format it uses. I can load protobuf. I don't care really. As soon as I can, like your application works, it means that this thing will work. And a nice part is that you can just go through the history of events, and you can see things here, right? This is the latest state, the full state. Let's do another operation, and let's do it in a bad way. So we execute the same payment once more, simulating a retry. And reload it. And look, we have 2 events coming up here after the initial 2, which is a payment recorded and the booking is fully paid. And you see the paid status is true. Anyone notice what the problem is? Registers the same payment twice.
Yep.
So I can quickly fix it. I have quite a few lines of code. Let me close the whole thing. So this is the power of, this is just like I said, off topic of the presentation. It's the power of event sourcing in transit state, following up on discussions usually we just had on Twitter last week and this week, and on Discord channel, not yours, but the other one. Because some people, like I said, try to materialize state all the time. I think it's not that good idea. Well, it might work as optimization, but it should not be a primary pattern. What can we do here is that we can change the representation of state. So in order to prevent duplicate payment requests to be processed, what do we need to do? Let's say it's our aggregate needs to protect from or be protected from it. Ideas? Well, we can record a payment fact and payment IDs at least in the state of the object, right? So I can just add this piece of state to what I already have.
I guess, Alexey, I guess normally in this scenario, point of service, point of sale terminals, they record amount and time. Basically, if customer tries to pay the same amount within over the, let's say, 4 or 5 seconds window,
Yeah.
they consider it as a
Yes.
duplicated payment.
But this command is not like I expose it through the API for demo purpose, because there is this payment thing which simulates what you just described, right? And it doesn't produce duplicate commands. But what happens is then this event from here, let's say this is the payment terminal handling or the integration with the payment provider, is the distributed process here. So when a payment gets registered in a completely separate bound context, the payment context, it produces an event that's saying, I registered 50 euro payment for booking 456, right? The booking bounded context, the service picks up that event, an integration event, and it says, okay, I need to register the payment in the booking and understand how much is still outstanding. These are two different pieces. Because I would never put the payment processing inside the same thing that handles the bookings themselves, right? So when I do it, I have a nice level of decoupling, but then I need to account for things that you just described. The payment processor prevents duplicate payments. In my system, I have a payment ID that can help me to ensure idempotency. But when I handle this command in the bookings domain, I got Oscar, you contingent over the wire. I got a source row too.
Sounds like weird computer virus.
Yeah, it is. What happens is it's always like exactly one delivery is not guaranteed. You might just get this thing twice because let's say the integration happens through RabbitMQ and it might deliver the message twice to you, right? So you need to be protected inside your domain model. It's not the best idea in the world to say my invariants are protected by someone else, right? So if I keep the payment record already exists, has a payment ID and amount paid, and I can just say when I handle this event, I can add a new record to this collection. And I can also create a query inside of state object that would tell me if the payment was previously registered. It's just a helper tool, right? It's not that it has no logic, right? People say, why do you put logic inside a state object? Because it's just a holder of the state. I say, okay, as soon as the operation is like a query, it's just another property inside. So now with this done, so what do I need to do in the record payment? Apparently, I need to check if it has been registered already. And then what I need to do if it's already been there. Crash.
Ignore it.
Nope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, because that's just an abundance check, right? If we already knew about a payment, we assume that just same thing happens twice. We can, of course, do a more comprehensive check. We say the payment ID is the same, but what about the amount? If the amount is different, apparently there is upstream problem. The amount is the same, we just ignore it because it's idempotency issue. The message came twice. But let's keep it simple. I just ignore it. And if we do it now, we still have one unpaid booking, which is good. Let's go here. So we still have this one. Let's use Spyglass to browse what's there. So now we have room booked and one payment recorded. And let's try to execute this operation again without changing anything. And even by looking here, we understand that the state hasn't changed. And we also got this thing. The payment has been registered in the collection. And the changes list is empty. So our check worked. Ta-da. Now the thing is that you might have not exactly noticed yet is that we changed the state of an object without executing any database migration, because it now has a payment collection. What if I load the state of 456 now? Would I have the payment collection there or not?
Are payments part of your events?
Yes.
Yes, we will then.
So yeah, so we just didn't have them, and now we have them out of the blue, magic. like, what would it take if this data persists in SQL database or Mongo? If it's in SQL or relational database, you would need to create a new table that holds the payments, and this table needs to be with nullable foreign key, because initially you don't have anything and you need to populate it from somewhere, right? And you might not even have this information. You need to call the payment processing guys. Could you please dump your database and send it to me so I can add this information, missing information, to my system? Like it's a very tedious job. Right here, we just got it out of the box because we were smart enough. Of course, if you haven't saved the payment information in events, you will be screwed anyway, right? But you usually at least put stuff that you receive in a command in event as well, you know, because that makes total sense. That's why sometimes when you decide what to put there, what not to put there, I'll say, okay, the information you use for decision making that's outside of your initial state, you should put there. And stuff that's been already like calculated by your aggregate, you also put there. It's a bloody Signal server, so please, or how it's called, Blazor server, so ignore it. It might be a bit glitchy at times. Still need to fine tune it, but usually it works fine. Not that one. Copy. So yeah, let's record another payment, which is let's do payment 2. And now it should be fine. So essentially what I think is, because when we talk about event sourcing, people say, oh, it brings you a time machine, but nobody ever built a time machine. I think, at least I haven't seen it. This one, I think, is the first of class. And I really like it because without any fancy or without you building any UI, you can actually go there and debug your system and understand how the state changes because events are being applied. So, okay, this is the event payload, and this is how the state changed, so you can get a record and stuff like that. I think it's pretty cool to see the history of things and like changing them in real time, going back and forth. I don't know. I'm very excited. I'm not sure you are, but
yeah, that looks cool. You could also add some diff tool for the state. That would
yeah,
be
I was
better.
thinking about it. It's pretty easy with the flat structure, but as soon as you go with a complex object, especially with collections, it might be a bit hardcore. So, but I added parsing arrays just 2 days ago because it wasn't there, and I have it. So I think everything is doable with a bit of dedication and time spent. So the diff tool, I also have in mind that the events could not be like, that don't need to be vertical. They could be like horizontal, like a film. And then you go there and you can see how the state changes. And you can actually have the representation of state underneath every event, because then you can compare them side by side. And if I can visualize the diff, it would be nice. Would be nice, yeah.
I would say only add, if I could, that there will be this approach. I think this is very useful because in my current project, my issue is that we need to sometimes put in every database in any table some status, and the status is something related with the events and change of some I would say process. And currently, if we have something like that, they will be easier to, I would say, reproduce changes and maybe show client in what process there is this part or something.
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely. I think it's very useful because you expect things to happen and sometimes they don't, or you don't expect things to happen, they do. So like, why? I read an article and about object-oriented programming and functional programming. It was completely different topic, but the author said, like, before we were obsessed with the data. It's like we need to persist state. It needs to be consistent and it needs to be how to say this, representative, and we care about it. But right now, with especially with high frequency operations and the scale we deal with, we start to ask ourselves a question: how the fuck we got here, right? How we got this piece of state? What is the history behind it? Because when the data grows, like it's completely ignorant to what happened before. but I think there are a lot of things to learn from the behavior of the system, or about the behavior of the system, by looking at like how user operations or external systems impact your data, because this is what you usually see in a state-based persistent systems, just a piece of state, right? But you don't know how you got here. I have stories about people not being able to find out the issue and just fixing them all over again for years, although with something like that they could probably find it quite easily. So this is the basic idea about, because if you look at a code of this thing, the spyglass itself, it's not open source. Sorry about that. Or maybe because I'm not proud to show this code. But if I look at the library itself, which you need to drop to the application in order for this thing to work, is open source. So you know that I'm not stealing your data or anything. Experimental here. So basically, it's just 3 classes, right? And this is a helper class. It exposes just a set of API endpoints. And what they do is they use this magic class called inside peak. And it's registered in the container, so it basically can take a dependency on your stuff. And when it does, it has the way how to construct your aggregate instance, how to construct the state. I mean, states are always, they have default constructors, so it's not really a problem. But because, for example, here, I use a handler registration. This is, as soon as I instantiate this object, I can look at the dictionary behind this registration. I can find out what events this state handles, right? And if I look at them, I find the schema of those events. So I can build something like a schema registry, which will be a bit more powerful than Kafka schema registry, to be honest. I can also load your events, right? This is the load. It's not hard. See, that's all I do. The state machine or the spyglass is only visualization tool. It's not, it doesn't have anything. It has zero knowledge about your application from the outside. This stuff is very easy. Like I just, I preloaded all the aggregate information, and I ask event store that you have, Postgres, MySQL, whatever, to load to read the stream, right? That you tell me to load, and I just do some not fancy stuff. I say, okay, I got a collection of things over your events, and in order to give you the historical state, I think it's not running anymore. That's why it fails. I will just load that version that you told me to load, right? When I click on this, it will load 2 events instead of all of them, or 3, or whatever, and I get a new piece of state. I might also try to expose things like this query, because essentially it's not that hard, because it just gets a string. But as soon as it becomes a complex object, I can't know anymore, right? So the drawback here, so these properties need to be public, which a lot of people don't like. But apparently with the power of affections, I can also disclose the values of private and internal fields. So it should be fine. Big plans ahead. I need to spend a bit less time on Spyglass and focus on Ventures itself. But nevertheless, I mean, I believe that I achieved quite a decent level of entry point for .NET developers that have not built event source systems before. I have showcases when someone who has never done it before or always dealt with SQL-based persistence just built a working prototype in a couple of weeks alone. So that was pretty cool to hear. I also have this thing with subscriptions and projections. Do you know how projections work, right? I mean, Oscar probably told you already. So you receive events from your event store, and you might receive them in Windows, whatever, underneath, but your subscription get them one by one because you want to have serialized process, linearized process. right? You want to process events in order. So let's say you receive, and then you project them one by one to another database. Let's say to MongoDB in this case. Now let's do some math. Projecting a single event to MongoDB, let's say it takes 5 milliseconds. How many events you can process in 1 second if you do it like that?
12, 11 more.
What? 5 milliseconds per event and 1 second.
20.
Someone open a calculator. It's 200.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's 4 milliseconds, 250. If it's 2 milliseconds, you're really hitting Mongo hard, and you have a big cluster, you still need to have a round trip to database. You still need to serialize your Bison, right? It will take, it will be able to process 500 events per second. Now, what if your load right now is 500 events per sec? So in just 2 seconds time, you will be missing how many? Let's say you have 1,000 events per second and you project 500. So in 2 seconds time, you will have 1,000 events not being processed. In a minute, you will have probably close to 100,000 state transitions that not been applied to your projection. So your projection is really, really stale. And you write a blog post, internet event sourcing is hard, don't let internet dupe you. So of course you can start batching things, right? Batching is a pretty decent thing. You need to be careful because you need to batch so it doesn't, you don't get to a situation then you expect pages of 1,000 events being, applied to a database. The database needs to handle it transactionally or at least sequentially, because the single batch can contain updates to the same document or rolling table. Still needs to be sequential. But then you might end up in the period of out of peak times, like in the night, you don't get 500 events or 1,000 events per sec, and you start to wait. So you need to kind of balance things and say, okay, 500 max or 1,000 max or half a second, right? So whatever I receive half a second, I receive 100, I still have a batch. I decided to solve it in a different way. I partition things by a partitioning function that you define. By default, it's a stream name, and process events concurrently. A stream name is a good partition key, to be honest. And let's say with 10 concurrent writers, a Mongo running locally, it speeds up 8 times. So going from 250 to 4,000, just like that.
Do you also support batching out of the box?
Not yet. The problem with batching is that, well, it can be very generic in terms of like I deliver to your consumer, not a single event, but a batch of events.
Yeah.
Then it's probably going to work because if it happens in a different way, right now you can do batching yourself, right? It's very easy. You just batch in the event handler, but I really want to do so to implement these things, right? I want to take the bootstrapping burden from you. So I will say, I will set a timeout that you define, and the default would be like a second or something, and then the max window size. But then handling the batch would be your responsibility. Let's say Mongo, it's pretty easy. You just do a batch update. With Elastic, it's not that easy because it will execute all of them except those that fail, and they will become out of order, right?
Yeah.
But then you need to be careful with this.
Yeah, that's also why I'm asking, because Elastic especially is the most efficient if you are not only doing the multiple writers, but also doing some batching. So yeah.
True. Yeah. Then the Elastic is also most efficient if you index the whole thing, right?
Yep.
So I'm entertaining 2 ideas of something similar to this, and that's what I talked to one guy. He asked for consulting about adventures. And I said, basically, this is a projection that's a projection to memory, right?
Yep.
And it's not that hardcore to build in-memory projection like this, because you can just take, you can see here, it used to be called aggregate state. And moving forward towards Oscar's beloved, more functional approach to event sourcing, I say it's not aggregate state, it's just state, right? It's event source state, which has nothing to do with the logic as such. So your domain logic is in the methods. Right now it's in here, but it could just as well be a set of functions. So the state becomes a bit more kind of universal, and you could actually use this as a projection. You can project to a state and keep everything in memory. And I know, after I talked to some people in Kandinsky, that there are people actually doing this. They replay the whole system every time they start because it's not that big, which is pretty interesting, and it's always consistent.
Yeah,
right?
Especially on the actor model, it's much easier to do.
Yeah, at the same time, actor model brings some of the other concerns, like cannot run serverless, and it has some other things, right? There's quite a lot of technical complexity brought in. So I'm trying to entertain the idea that there could be something like a stateful projection that will, it can only work with one instance, right? You just need to be aware of the limitation. But at the same time, it can, no, I can actually work on this too. The idea here is that if you have some stickiness, let's say, okay, if you even have serverless, but you have sticky sessions, your user will probably talk to the same instance all the time, even executing different commands. Okay, not guaranteed, there could be safety net built around it. But if you build this state and then shovel this state to Elastic, that will be very fast. And you can deduplicate it, because that's what we did in one system, but we were projecting from Mongo to Elastic. So Mongo was normal projection with updates of individual fields. We subscribed to the change feed of Mongo and receiving full versions of the document, replacing them in Elastic. And then when we receive the several updates for the same document in a batch, we will deduplicate them and take only the last version, and then overwrite the one we have. And it was very efficient. We were doing a few thousand per sec on not that big cluster, Elastic Cloud. So there are a few things that can make this faster. So the partition projections, for example, the guy Oscar knows, running production system basically with some of the POS payment terminals and offline synchronization and stuff. They were really struggling with the speed of projection because they were synchronizing multiple event store instances. So instance running locally on the cache here, they will take all the stuff that they collected during the day and shovel it over to the central system by the end of the workday. And it might contain millions of them. They say it's just taking too long, and they used partition projections, and they say, okay, it was a game changer, because apparently from 2 hours it went down to 5 minutes, something like that. That was pretty cool to hear, and it was actually quite long ago with quite a few bugs there, but they were still happy. I mean, I'm trying to accommodate some of the ideas that are around the community. When I talk to people, they tell me stuff, and I write a blog post and say, I talked to Jeremy Chassan about not projecting events to a state, just using original events collection as a state, and they implemented it, right? So cross-pollination works really well, and when it's not closed source, people come up with ideas, describe what they think about it, report bugs, of course, and it gets fixed, right? By the way, the Postgres is not, it's my work. I refactored it, but the initial contribution was from someone else. The SQL Server is completely external contribution. I haven't touched it at all. So this is how I try to do things. So there is a small community behind it. The Ventures has close to, it seems small, but at the same time, it's not as small as some others. I wouldn't mention names again. It's not as big as Eventflow, for example. Eventflow, is it called? This old event sourcing framework.
No, don't even mention it.
Okay, yeah. We have opinions. So it's getting close to 300 stars. It's not astonishing result, but it's like 1.5 years old, and not being widely advertised. I'm trying to be a bit cautious about it. And if you look at NuGet, I think it has passed 100,000. No, it will pass 100,000 by the end of the year for sure, because it has about 154 per day. So it's being used. It's not new. It's built with production experience in mind, and some of the cases that I built in are real because it's driven by demand. So I don't have Kafka subscriptions just yet because, well, nobody really needed that badly, but I think I will need it in production myself, so I will build it. Google PubSub support is built in because that's one of the first things we started to do. So yeah, you're welcome to use it.
Yeah,
Just go to in here, and there is the docs, stuff like that.
yeah, I can say I already mentioned that, I think, on Discord or on email, that I'm also using my own spyglass, and I'm quite often checking how Alexey did that when I'm working on some sample and or some article, even to just compare. So I haven't used yet Eventus. I need to finally play with it, but I skimmed a lot the code base, and I can say that, yeah, indeed, it has already a lot of things and the stuff that you might not even predict, just like Alexey said. So, and the docs are written in a blogish style, so I also like to read it. It has also nice content, not only about Eventus, but event-driven.
Yeah, that's true.
architecture.
Yeah, I'm trying to push some of the patterns that I use. I find it useful. I just showed the level of complexity sometimes people underestimate, like, you know, what can be simpler than spanning out events to multiple partition consumers than except you need a single checkpoint. That's the thing, right? When you deal with Kafka, let's say, or Event Hub, you have partitions and every partition has its own offset. So it's pretty easy to put a consumer group that will consume a single partition for a single consumer, right? But the Kafka cannot consume from a single partition with more than one consumer. That's what people don't realize very often. You can have one consumer consuming multiple partitions, but you cannot have more than one consumer consuming a single partition, because it's already pre-partitioned. I don't have partitions, right? I read it from a single log, so I need to partition the memory. What does it mean for the checkpoints? Well, yeah, that's partitioning filter, but there is something, I always go here to talk about this, and I always miss it. It's actually in the checkpoint thing. But this is the hard part, because when you partition, you still have a single checkpoint to maintain. And they process in different speeds. And then there is quite comprehensive process to find out things that were processed in order and commit checkpoints exactly the right time. So it took me a while to figure it out. There might be simpler ways to do it. I think this stuff works. Actually, it's not a lot of code, to be honest, but it took me like several months to figure it out with sketching and, you know, ideating and stuff like that. So there is quite a lot of thought put into it. It's not ideal in many places. It requires maybe some more love in terms of organizing things. For example, I don't particularly like that the core project, the Eventus library itself, contains a bit too much. I think it has. That's the project you usually reference in the domain model, right? But it has application surveys, event store, aggregate store, serializers, and shit like that. It's like, yeah, do you really want to take dependency on a package like this? From a heuristic point of view, no. From a pragmatic point of view, well, you probably don't give a shit, and that's right. But I might just decide to restructure it a little bit. And I think a lot of potential is in the observability, kind of functional observability, where knowing how your application is built, using things like that, which is not complicated to build, I can expose a lot of internal stuff. For example, I can tell you which command you process and what application service you have. And I can tell you which subscriptions you have, what events they process, and I can link them together, right? So I don't know, without looking at the trace, that application service called this method in the domain model. That I don't know. I can use traces to figure it out, but that requires collection of the trace and storing your data, which probably I need to avoid. I might do it later on. Sell your data to Facebook. to Google. No, I won't do that. But let's say you produce an event and it goes to subscription. That I can figure out very easily. I can say these are things. And let's say if several applications start to report to Spyglass, it requires a bit more proactive. Like now I'm looking at you, but if I want to do what I'm talking about, the application will report to me. But then it could tell you, similar to what Kafka has, I didn't know about, I just learned recently. So let's say you produce your domain events and you store it in event store, and you say, I don't want to share this because that's my domain events, right? So Eventus has support for separation of public and private events, which I think is very important. That's why I built it. But somehow someone sneaked in and convinced the ops guy to give them a connection string to your event store and started consuming it directly from you. And then you change your schema, which is completely legal thing to do. You are the owner of that domain model. You're owner of that big language and bounded context. And they started complaining. They say, what the fuck? I consume from you and broke the schema. It's like, that's my domain. It's not contract, right? And I described this about private and public, and Matthias Ferrari described it in his messaging patterns blog series. But if you report this information, this kind of telemetry to Eventus, whatever cloud, I have a domain, you see? Eventus.cloud, cool. I can figure it out. Say, dude, someone is consuming these events from you, and that's not you. So I have these ideas about bringing the concept of bounded context as a thing that you can register, right? So I know that these services compose bounded context, and they have these subscriptions because subscription can be taken out to another service, right? It's a different deployable unit, and you might even not know it before you just see things breaking, right? So what I want to is to bring things together. With potentially building a schema registry, I can say, okay, when you start your application, your schema is actually incompatible. And there are consumers that expect the old schema from you. Consumers inside your bound context, you don't give a shit about externals, but your bound context needs to be aligned in the schema, right? I'm not sure about semantic comparison because that's what Kafka schema registry started to do. Before they were comparing strings or hashes of strings, just JSON contract, and say, oh, it's not. You change two fields like this, and they say it's not compatible anymore. Now they start to do semantic comparison. So maybe this is something I can do as well. And it becomes easier to discover things. I'm just talking about ideas that I have. Because this stuff kind of gives you the toolbox, but it doesn't prevent you from doing stupid things. For example, Eventus wouldn't complain unless it times out if you have aggregates with 10,000 events in it. Your system will be slow, but it wouldn't tell you a thing, right? Or someone from the outside consumes your domain events. But I want to bring these things like giving the functional observability. That's what I call it, or maybe it's a bad name, or like I don't know how to call it. You will need to help me with that, guys. Observability kind of next because the traces, right? Where is it? I think I closed it. It just bring you the sequence and timeouts and delays and errors potentially happening and the execution flow. That's fine, but it's very technical, right?
Yeah, they are a mixture of technical and non-technical stuff. So
non-technical, you need to bring it in. You need to deliberately put some tags. That's what Eventus does, and say this is the command type, something that OpenTelemetry doesn't force you to do, but I put it because I know you need it, right? But what I can tell you, like if you send telemetry of a specific type to, let's say, Eventus Clouds that doesn't exist yet, I can tell you your streams are too long because I talked to pretty big customer event stores just the other day, and I asked them what's your max stream length, and they say, yeah, we don't know. What's your average stream length? Oh, we don't know. Yeah. So sometimes they rightfully said you're producing a database and we are using it, we're paying it for using it, so you should know. Say you're right, but I'd say that the database knows just as much, right?
Yeah.
The application framework that kind of tries to encapsulate certain patterns, it has a knowledge about patterns themselves and what are anti-patterns too, and say, okay, your stream length is reaching like 200 events. That's why your latency started to increase, the command processing time. And I might have optimizations because I have ideas how to optimize it too, and say, at least you need to enable this thing so your system will become faster. And you still need to maybe look at your design because this is the smell, right? Long streams is. So this kind of stuff, I think it's very interesting because I have never seen anything like that before. So, and I plan to just, do it. Any help is appreciated. So if you want to contribute, go ahead.
Yeah, I can say that indeed the tooling and this DevOps tooling around event-driven system needs to be enhanced. I even not usually advocating around the traveling in time feature, even though it's like an obvious and usually presented as the first one, because as you said, I've rarely see someone using that capability. So in past, I was exposing also the online projections through API, so doing that live, but not in a systematic way. And most of the people are just gathering the current state and call it a day, and are not using those capabilities. So I agree.
But then you see that like what happens if your state changes. So like if you have this tool from the start and you don't need to build it, you would probably use it more. If you're forced to build it, and by the time you build it, because you always postpone this moment, you already have a projection to Mongo that just shows you the state. Say, oh fuck it, I don't need it, right?
Yeah.
Unless you start to change the state, because people sometimes get in this vicious circle. I project the state somewhere, and it's precious to me because I can look at it. So now I cannot really iterate on the representation of the state in my domain model because I need to keep my database intact. So you start to get afraid to change your state structure because the projection of the state will stop working. You need to refactor it too. That might be too big work, especially if it goes to relational database. It's like, okay, fuck it. I will try to kind of hide it. So I don't really care that much anymore. It's like if you have it in your hands, that's pretty powerful. But I'm thinking like when there is a baseline, right, that your application builds upon, not only it allows you to start building value faster and actually do the job you're paid to do, but also these building blocks, because they're known by, because you're using Avengers, right? I know what you use. It could be possible, it is possible already to collect some of the telemetry and functional information that could prevent you from doing stupid things, like I said, and be proactive in terms of, putting the guardrails again, like I showed in the bowling slide. It's like, yeah, you can start building it now, but there is things to prevent this day plus 3 or 5 or 25, 365 issues. Like, because the system will grow, you never know if your streams will be long, right?
Yeah.
But you end up in this, I have a story, right? We built our first event source system, and because people were so scared, they say, okay, we're never sure if all components run, and we didn't have distributed traces, right? So what they built is the synthetic test, very simple one. Every 10 minutes, it will submit a command to single aggregate and read the projections, all the projections on the other side, ensuring they work, right? We didn't have Prometheus at the time. We didn't collect any metrics that will say this is subscription gap. It all came later. And then the system became fucking slow. And nobody knew why. And the database grew tremendously. Like there was the event store database. Like, why is it so big? And they found out they kept producing this command. It produced events to a single stream. And that stream became millions of records long. And it was taken like an hour to read. And until they figured it out, like it was complete mystery. And it was happening automatically all the time. They forgot about it. So like in this case, I would tell them, oh, look, you have a stream of project 1 to 3, and that suddenly have a growing stream of more than 1,000 events or 1 million or whatever. It would be very obvious, right? You would just be triggered by this. Jesus, what's going on? I never expect my project stream to be so long. There are just mistakes sometimes we make. Sometimes we make bad design decisions. Sometimes we do something else. And like right now, the subscription gap metric is exposed technically, right? So you need to really understand it. You need to put observability on top of it, like Prometheus or any other scraper or even OpenTelemetry collector and send it to Datadog or to Honeycomb. But it could be also observed functionally, like this is supposed to happen. And you can put SLOs to it or something like that. Let's say this particular read model needs to be unconditionally updated within one second, otherwise it's too slow. And that can be monitored as well. It could be monitored by DevOps tools, but it's a bit harder. You need to do something to make it work.
Yeah, I can say that I was also recently thinking a lot about that, but I haven't figured out yet the proper way how to deal with this stuff. So it's like conceptually, it's not so hard to do, but technically, it might be much harder. I mean, maybe not technically, but figuring out how to do it to not be so intrusive, but also useful.
Well, right now, Eventus exposes the gap metrics, and it exposes it in the position, which is pretty bad. And when it comes to Event Store DB all stream, because it's a commit position, as some of you know, it's just a arbitrary monotonically incrementing number, but it's not monotonically incrementing. It's just incrementing number because it's offset in bytes. That's why you cannot take the latest event position and another event position and say between them there is 10 events, because it could be 10, could be 1,000, depending on the payload size. I hope this will be fixed by Postgres, for example. Implementation can report to you the number of events that you're lagging behind, but it can unconditionally report you the time difference, and that's very useful. That can be observed, that can be pushed on the dashboard, and that can be monitored, and you can have alarms for that too. But then again, you need to do it, right? So the metrics are being exposed. You need to send it over to the right place. You need to put the monitors alerting and stuff like that yourself. And you might forget about this, just, accidentally. So I'm thinking like, if this telemetry is sent to Eventus, I know that these events are coming from here and it goes there, and there is a schema change or whatever, it will break. And this needs to have this particular timeline of the processing, or maybe you can put the SLO on the command and say, when the command is received and until all the projections or that particular one, that's the delay, lead time, right? It's called lead time in the messaging world. You can do that too. What struck me as well, and that's where I started to think more about the extra functional level of telemetry and observability. I've been on the AWS Summit in London this year in May, beginning of May. And there was a big presentation about using event hubs. They have this new thing that grew from the logs, actually, the CloudWatch. It's kind of a messaging thing, and it allows you to do very cheap pub sub. It's not ordered, so just beware. But it's very easy, and it's like cost nothing, literally. Like it's much cheaper than SNS or anything. And it has replays. It has like log. It's persistent. You can replay them. I don't know what's use of it, but the lady, she is the AWS developer advocate, and she was showing stuff like she built a few lambdas, and they were talking to each other using events. So like, how did you debug this process? Like, oh, you need to collect these logs, and they show like tons of logs and all this information. It's like you need to look carefully here and then correlate it with there and stuff like that. It's like, Jesus Christ, that's like 19th century. This is never going to work. It's too much. And it's a very simple system, like 5 lambdas talking to each other. It was completely incomprehensible. Even putting distributed traces on that would be much easier, but then you need to build code to do that. But it's like on a functional level, you don't see an overview. So I think, okay, this is what I need to build. And I think it's very important for people to not get lost in all these things and all these microservices and the synchronous message handling and stuff like that. So
yeah. We are about 1 hour and a half. I don't mind that. I can continue, but maybe we can give the chance for people to ask some questions.
Sure.
Yeah. So there is already question from C Fellow. He asked on the post booking, what will be the event type if 2 events were applied? I'm not sure about the context of that. It might be already answered when you show this how you deal with idempotency, but if not, then C Fellow, if you could give more context, then that would be great. I'm not sure if you're here.
Yeah, I'm muted. I saw on your demo there where you posted the booking, and then you could get the changes from that post, and it showed the event type. So my question is, it showed only one event type.
2,
So,
3
yeah,
actually.
so
Room booked, payment process, and booking fully paid.
on the Swagger API,
Oh, there's a command. Oh yeah. This is event type. Yes. Let me just do it again.
Yeah. So let's say you have when you're booking there, maybe there's another event again, another domain event that is.
Oh yeah, this one, for example, the last payment produced 2 events. You can see that it's a list of changes. So it's the payment recorded,
Okay,
and afterwards it's fully paid. Because the system is there, I don't like this. I added the status paid or not, just for demonstration purposes. But what happens is that this process of handling the payment is 2-step. So if you look here in the record payment, so it does our new idempotency check. It also applies payment record because it's unconditional except for this, of course. But it also calculates the outstanding amount, and they say, okay, I recorded the payment. In the previous version, I had this property is fully paid or not in here, but I found it like you need to separate concerns in the main events as well. And then I added this line, mark paid, fully paid if necessary. And I apply fully paid if outstanding amount. It should be, I guess, less than equal to 0, because it could be overpaid, because we can easily do this, right? So mark overpaid, and then whatever, and say if stuff like this, and say if it's less than 0, we can overpaid. And it, like, if your second payment is exceeded, the amount exceeds the booking price, it will emit 3 events, because it's still fully paid. These things are separate. Like fully paid means that the full amount was covered, but you might have overpaid, and then you emit a new event. And someone who is issuing refunds, for example, would only listen to overpaid event. They don't need to listen to this or this, right? So then it's very clear how to separate them. And this could be like this, right? And then you call this mark overpaid. Something like that. So you can emit as many events as you want. As soon as they are in the same stream, it's transactional update. That's at least how I try to keep events focused on a single thing, right? A single state transition rather than multiple.
Yeah, it's similar what we were modeling on the distributed process webinar, because there was like group checkout, and we were also listening for like handing the comment mark guest checkout as completed, and we had this group checkout aggregate that was checking whether all of the guests did already the checkout, and if then we were publishing the additional event. So it's a similar pattern.
So this how it actually be like, almost like overpaid. I can also supply payment ID there. For example, if it's overpaid, I might issue refund. So I need to capture this thing on the other side and the payment processor and say this payment ID needs to be partially refunded, because that's how we usually do it, right? I don't need to listen to that. You can also build a specific read model answering your other question, like if I need to run a query, you build a projection, right? So, and then you can have a specific projection that say, show me only overpaid bookings. That's very easy. You don't need to run filters like less than 0 is overpaid, equals 0 fully paid, and more than 0 is not paid or partially paid. You can just build specific projections for that particular purpose and clean it up. When, let's say, you issue the refund, you update the projections, say, okay, I need to remove it from the list. So it's pretty powerful, because one of the projections I have here, you might have a look in the sample project where it queries, because I have my booking projection basically turns around the whole thing. So because booking state projection is also like it's useless because I now have Spyglass, I don't need it anymore, but it's just projecting the state as it is. So it just says, okay, fully paid, true, right? For booking fully paid. And it uses, of course, the booking ID as a primary key. So you always have this document that basically represents the booking state. But my booking projection uses the guest ID as a primary key. And if I look at Mongo now, I hope it works, Compass. Let's see. That's the second one. But that's the database, and you can see that bookings is pretty straightforward, right? These are all our stuff. 457, 456, all of them. And if you look at my bookings, there are just 2 documents. It's Alexey and Oscar, and it shows both of Oscar's bookings, 456. So it's a different primary key. And we didn't need to do that much to make it work. And it can be added afterwards if you discover, okay, I stopped querying by guest ID in that collection. I just add a new one, right? You can have a projection that says pending or upcoming stays that you usually see on Booking.com, like your past stays, your upcoming stays, your check-in today, and stuff like that. It's very easy to build. And they don't really impact the system that much. You can just start with building a new service from scratch on the side. Basically, building a new projection is extremely easy. This is the whole code, right? If you use Mongo, it's straightforward. SQL is not that hard. Just need to produce some SQL statements. But to run it, what you need to do is this, right? And of course, you need to add it like Mongo. And so basically, to run a subscription with booking state projection, my booking projection, these are 3 lines of code, literally. Of course, it needs event store client in addition, but that's it. And everything is handled for you, checkpoints and everything. So it's pretty easy to do stuff like experimenting on the side and spinning up new services. Then you will start lacking observability. I mean, if you put your distributed traces in place, it will be fine. If you don't, then you better do. Because it can quickly get out of hand. So that right now, when I do this, right, I can add payment ID here, and I can create a special list collection in Mongo that will say my or all overpay booking or waiting for refund and stuff like that. So.
Out of curiosity, if you have this Mongo projection, then are you also handling that internally cases when you need to have the current state of document to run the projection logic?
No, yeah, it's like you know the answer, right?
I haven't checked, but I was
no,
curious.
I mean, it is possible, right? That's why I say it's way less opinionated than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
You can, because this on thing, it's the registration of the handler, but I believe there is on async. that basically gives you, you can get a document ID. It needs to be, I think it's, this one is synchronous, but this one is asynchronous. So you can build the update using the Mongo instance that you have, right? So you can read and then update. It's just that I don't. The issue with that, if then when you receive the event twice, accidentally it might happen. Someone asked me, do you support exactly one semantics, processing semantics in Eventus? And I said no, and it's a kind of deliberate decision because I push people to use idempotent projections, and it's not hard to do because especially with operations like absurds, all Mongo operations in Eventus by default, it can be overridden by default are absurds. So this could be called before this one. I mean, they are always in order, but this can be processed twice for the same booking, and it will just you know, not update anything because it only uses data that comes from the event. I think that's why we need to put stuff already there. That's why in here, for example, outstanding amount is put inside the event. So it's right there because otherwise you would calculate it in the read model, which is really bad.
Yeah, I agree. I was asking because I wrote once article how this can be handled, although I also recommend people to use the similar approach. So handle that on the event modeling part. So add potentially redundant data, but then instead of like incrementing balance twice, then you will apply the state of the balance twice and you will get the same result. While with incrementing you won't. So
yeah, and it's also like, you know, I mean, we try to be like safe and stuff, but someone goes to your Mongo and puts some other field, and then you just decrement this field to increment it, and it will go really hardcore. I think your domain needs to be the source of truth, and all the logic that happens here, because I could have the logic that would, for example, calculate a currency rate as well, because I received the currency.
Or discounts.
Or discount, or whatever. So it's completely different. It's completely up to the domain model to produce this, to execute these calculations and produce the result ready-made for consumption without guessing. I think like, do I need to add or I need to deduct, right? It's
so at least that's the hard part to put into framework.
Oh yeah, that's literally impossible. And basically, it's not like, you know, I know that people might need it, right? So that's why this build on async exists, because you not necessarily need to reach out to Mongo, but you might need to reach out to another read model. You might reach out to external service to get the data because you just don't have it. It's similar to your customers, right? You just don't have it. Let's say you forgot to put the amount. Then you have no choice, but then you can build a code there that is okay. If the amount is there, then I will not. Then I will use it. If amount is not there, I have to load it.
Yeah.
Right. So there are. It's more like for fallback scenarios, and sometimes just communicating with some other things, because you might build a read model that represents state of external system, right, from their events, or you might need to call their API, and because there is no domain model for it, you just it's not yours. And they say, if you call us here, we provide you with the data you need, and you just build it in. So how you do it? Either you do it in application server and put this data in your domain. It's one choice. If you want to build consolidate read model that spans across multiple bound contexts, so you build a new context, a reporting context, that might be the only way to do it, right? Who knows?
Yeah. And speaking about projections, there is a question from Jesse. What is the typical workflow for updating projections? Do you build another projection and rerun? Thinking about ops perspective of things.
Yeah, the answer is always it depends, as we know it. It depends on many things, right? So first of all, if your update is destructive or not, does it imply schema change? If it does, you might decide to execute on the side, project into a completely new schema from scratch. But if you have a billion of events, it might take a while. So if you're able to identify a point of time when you say the stuff from before that moment of time, I don't need. I project only from that moment of time, and it's just a week of data, and maybe from 1 billion it shrinks to 3 or 50 million, and that's doable, right? So it's always depending on several factors and the projection speed and stuff like that. Eventus has an archiving feature. It's not exactly kind of perfect. It's more like a concept which can be used. But it also allows you to shrink the data set and say, okay, I deliberately truncate my streams and put stuff out to the archive. And when they replay from operational database, you just don't read from archive. Then you can build it on the side. Sometimes you have no choice. By the way, these guys who build this thing with adding one event every 5 minutes to same stream, they also once needed to change the schema. It was RavenDB at the time. They say, okay, we create a migration. I say, whoa, wait a moment. You need to replay. And I say, what? It's like, yeah, that's what event sourcing is for. You can build a new one, build it and rebuild it on the side, and then switch the flip the switch, right? So we have done it, and basically they found out they can't be replayed anymore because their projection code was not capable of replaying. So they forgot, they removed some of the handlers for all events, or they were not thinking about versioning of event schema. Because when you do the destructive change on event schema, you need to consider the consequences, right? You usually keep the handlers intact. They are almost that important. This code is in here, for example, for that particular event, or this one is important to some extent. For example, I was able to add a new line here because it didn't change the previous line, so it's fine. And the structure of the event hasn't changed that much. I can add to this event a couple of more fields, like who is the payment provider? Would it be destructive? No, it's a big schema, so it will still deserialize. I don't need to change my handler, but if I change it drastically, right, then I would need to say, okay, this stays, and I add one more for a new event. It's pretty easy, actually. It's not. That's why I think the event versioning topic is overrated. Because of my talk at Kandinsky, I said, what problems with the event source system you think are important or really kind of deserve attention? And a guy said, versioning. I said, I do it for a living. I never had problems with versioning. What are you talking about? So, I mean, maybe something that I gotta get for granted, like you don't do it, or just add a new event, keep your code intact. Consider this at important event handlers. This is what people struggle with. Maybe that needs explanation, and then the problem goes away.
Yeah,
that might be.
From my experience, it's like that's pros and cons of event sourcing, because it's showing you that you have broken data, and when you have the current state, you just don't see that. And in events, so people see that the schema changed and that it diverged from what it should be, while in classical approach, it's just easy to miss it because you just see what you have and you don't care, because you just, I mean, you care sometimes if client complain, but besides that. And plus,
I would say,
and plus the other thing is, I think the hardest part is missing ops side about replaying, etc. As you know, the tooling in general is not great in many event-driven technologies. I mean, they give you the basic tooling, the raw tools to do that, but you don't have like button like replay this projection or so, right?
That actually I might build one. But the thing is that, for example, if I decide to replay this one, adding some stuff, right? And I can tolerate the maintenance window because my booking, everything else will work, right? But that particular subscription group will go offline because the data won't be updated there, or it will be stale for a while. So what I could do, I can delete the checkpoint, right? And this will replay everything from scratch. But getting back to the original question, I think it's I'm a big fan of keeping the query API that reads from the read model and the read model code, like the projection to the read model, together in one place, because they use the same contract for the database access, right? Like the database schema and the document contract, or the ORM contracts, or whatever, same SQL statements basically. So it makes it easier to deploy the new version. Let's say I slightly change the API, but or even, yeah, introduce a new version of API. For this, I need a new variation of this projection. So I deploy the whole thing together, and when it kind of builds up, I can flip the switch and say, using blue-green coordination, saying this goes down, this picks up. So there are things that are still like on the ideation phase. There are a couple of places in the benches. I'm trying this stuff, ideas. I'm not sure how. I never advertised it. I just put it in. It's like, you know, a user voice, something like that. You can just look at the ideas I have. Another place to do exactly the same, and I still have no decision made about the right place, is to use the discussions. The problem with discussions, they link to a single repo. And I have things like Eventus Connector, which deserves this completely different webinar. Maybe it's a pretty interesting idea, I think, and it's used. But it's a different repo, right? And this one is like consolidated place. And because this one is in connector, and this one is on the venture side. Getting back to the what I thought, where is, I think it's an issue. No, not this one. See, free QA. I have people finding issues for me. That's the best thing about open source. So here, if you deploy it and say my API needs to be fault tolerant, and then I have 2 instances, but only one instance of the subscription needs to run. Otherwise, it will keep overriding each other, right? It's just waste of CPU. Your projection side important is fine. There will be no nasty side effects, but they will keep overriding each other, checkpoint and data as well. So it's double work. And I'm thinking maybe of introducing some sort of leader election, which is kind of stateless, because I'm very interested in serverless scenarios now. I think a lot of event source systems can be run serverless. And I want really to experiment with that, because I think it has a lot of potential. When you start building a system, it's kind of stupid to spin up Kubernetes cluster or VMs to host your stuff that's being called like 100 times a day. It's waste of resources. You know, you can do 1 million Lambda invocations for free in a month. And I would really love to see a startup that does one, like just all the CPU cost is 0 until they reach 1,000 commands per month. I think it's pretty cool. But then it needs some support. It needs some work underneath that basically make it a safe environment. And I have some ideas about this as well. Because like, how do you ensure that if your subscription is serverless, it gets shut down, basically projects all events. And I have an idea how to solve that. So you might just look it up. This one, the monolithic deployment. So I think it's all doable. And again, rolling back, packaging API and the subscription together allows you to do linear deployments, but it needs to be orchestrated manually at the moment. This basically, what you do is you project to an empty database. If you tolerate the maintenance window, just delete checkpoints and maybe delete the whole bloody collection or database, and it will be reprojected. That's the thing about projections, that that's why I'm a big fan of keeping checkpoint together with the read model itself in the same place. But what I can do, I can actually show it to you. Booking is not running, so where is my Mongo? So this is the database, right? Delete it. Aha. No database, right? I run my bookings again. Here it goes. It's back. Magic. Well, that's why I see that people kind of keeping the state and putting so much focus on like I need to keep my agree state in somewhere in database so I can have fast loads. And like we had this discussion, like okay, it has its valid points somewhere. I think I can optimize the more like the system as a trial state to do faster loads on longer streams and maybe avoiding the load at all. But treating the state like this is a projection, so it can be rebuilt at any moment of time if you don't have a gigantic data set. It's very powerful because you stop caring about this that much. You even don't really need a backup if your database is small enough, honestly, because it just will be rebuilt.
Yeah, Greg Young told that you should rewrite on each
The store.
deployment. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Good
that's
luck
too
with that.
far. But that's too far. And
Yeah, I don't know the reason for that, honestly. Yeah, because I think it's I mean, it's a good exercise and it makes your data like fresh and clean and you can do other things. But I believe that certain things he advocates for, like changing the schema and or truncating streams, can be done pretty effectively in when running the system, right? That's what I want to build. It's not there yet. This crash is not mine, so it's from investor client. I fixed it, by the way. Still hasn't got a new version of the client. I hope it will be there.
Nice. Then I can update my samples.
Yeah, I fixed it long ago, like 3 months. It still hasn't been released. So.
Pity. We have one more question from C Fellow about versioning, but about the V1 prefix in your booking events like that. So is there some convention based on the prefix, or it's just the attributes that you showed? How you
no,
handle?
that's just my preference. There is no I just want to, because usually when I think about let's look at this, for example. So people have APIs and they have complete schemas, right? And they version the schemas. So I might advocate, I haven't decided on this yet, but I might advocate for changing the complete version of the schema. Like if you move to a new insights in your domain. So this is the version, the changes between versions 3 and 4 of GitLab API. And if you look at our endpoints, and this is the API endpoint, right? But how it actually looks like in here, it prefixes the version of the API entirely, right? So that's why I want to put it up front. So you know, I even can do it things like that, which makes it pretty easy to manage. Because if I have it as a suffix, then I need to keep adding things here, right? If I have it as a prefix, I can say off we go, right? Then I put my new version over there. Oh, see? Copilot just copy pasted my stuff. So that becomes pretty easy. It's not possible with suffix, so I need to keep adding, and I can split them out because I can declare this static class is kind of namespace booking events. I can make it partial, create a folder. It's called legacy. Say it doesn't create a namespace. Move this class over, this V1 stuff to legacy, and basically have or even have folders and stuff like that. Makes it easy to maintain versions without growing this file to thousands of events or whatever. So just like if I need to look at it, I probably will look at the latest version only.
Yeah, in Martin, I recently implemented those subcasters and I provided a similar way. So you can either use attributes if you want, but you can also use the manual fluent registration and just provide your type there, and even just function, how to map those. If you want
Yeah,
to,
I
for
mean,
example,
if
you, for example, want to keep just the latest version and the rest just remove or archive.
Because I was thinking for the spyglass, you've seen that when it shows you the aggregate, it says events applied to the state, and it works because this guy has a dictionary inside. But some events like might not be here, right? I decide, for example, not to apply payment register and use events, original events as a state source. Then it wouldn't work. But I can create an attribute saying this, like I have for commands. I think somewhere here. Here, aggregate commands. It exists. I just commented it out because I use kind of fluent registration like you do with a function. But if you annotate it like this, it's easily discoverable. So I can do code generation. I can do just reflections and stuff like that, just to see what attributes you have and put this out in a certain way.
Okay. Thanks. Question from Yevgeny. How do you guys explain what domain events to the product business people are?
Yeah, I always explain these are recorded facts. To developers, you can say these are state mutations that have a name, right? It's not just update field, it has a name, right? It conveys intent. That's why naming events is important, because it describes the behavior of the system. I keep saying that event sourcing is the first persistence mechanism that tells you that persists the behavior, because we keep saying domain model are so nice because they express the behavior of the system, but as soon as you update the state, the behavior is gone, right? Event sourcing is the first reliable way, because you can emit events on the side, right? This is a reliable way to persist the behavior of the system as it is. As it is, it expresses your understanding, because speaking about versions, for example, you introduce a new event type. But Greg says that if you have produced a destructive change, you might actually say, I don't like keeping money in the command or in event as amount and currency flat. I would introduce a new type called money and then put them in. That will be a destructive change because it will stop deserializing, right? This you can call a version. But if you say I have a completely different event that, for example, will do something else, I don't know, then it's a different, it expresses your evolution understanding the system. And that's where it also you can see and you can show the product people like, this is the behavior of the system as we knew it before. This is the behavior of the system as we know it now. These are facts recorded in a different way, and maybe even different facts.
Yeah, I'm also using facts, but quite often I'm just saying like a checkpoints of the big business process, because like you can clearly ask, like, tell me what are the checkpoints of those processes, what are the essential parts, like what's happening there. And from my experience, I have much more issues with developers explaining what's event than for business people.
You're just going to use this as state mutation.
Yeah. Yeah, but really, I had product owner that was he was really non-technical guy. He was a specialist in the domain, and after working with us for like a month or two, he was telling us like, just send this module that and that event, and they will listen and follow up. And I was like, whoa. And yeah, but really, from my experience, if we are not trying to use some hard technical words, then usually they understand that better than us.
And you can see that, for example, let's say the booking can be, you can produce an event, say, ready for check-in or something like that. And that's like, what is the precondition? You can roll back, right? And say it needs to be fully paid because you can check in. Or you can say another variant of that is that you took the deposit or something like that, right? So there should be, like, you can roll back and say, okay, it's ready for chicken. So what should have happened before? It's like, oh, it's fully paid, fine. What else can happen? The deposit taken. Pretty easy, actually. I was not allowed to check in the hotel without presenting a credit card at Kafka Summit, by the way. But clearly, like, there is a block Apparently, they might have state-based systems saying, okay, not allowed to check in. But if you talk to domain people or to business people, say like, why is that? Why is it locked? Because it hasn't been, the deposit has been recorded or taken. Because they also have two versions, right? So you can just use a debit card and pay the deposit or cash, or you can use a credit card and they block the amount on it. These are all different events. But they form a precondition in which like the next state transition can happen. The command expresses the intent and the event expresses that something has already, it's a fact, right?
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
I'm thinking to build a command store as well, just for audit purposes. Then you can easily link them together using even technical attributes because they're produced within the same trace and say, okay, I'm thinking still like, do I need to introduce correlation causation ID? Something you, Oscar, asked me like last week.
Mm-hmm.
It might be. If commands are stored, it would make sense. If commands are not
Yeah.
stored, it's kind of pointless. When a command is stored, you can actually build a full sequence of things like the whole workflow without looking at traces.
Yeah, funny you say that because today I started to work on such example, putting commands into the event store. But yeah, I agree. Okay, we have two more questions and then we'll probably starting to slowly wrap up. I'm really surprised that, I mean, not extremely surprised, but we still have people here. So
Yeah,
the
that was
webinar
pretty
is
long,
good.
yeah.
Okay, so again, next question from Citelo. When you want events to have a lifetime, like say in a banking scenario, where you want to close the stream at the end of the month and carry over current balance, how do you do that?
That's actually not hard because first of all, what you need to do is I think it's a very good one because I strongly believe that every business entity has its life cycle, which has a start and finish, right? After certain thing happens, like a month's close, or in this case, for example, the booking would be closed after the checkout. We could say, okay, arbitrary without thinking about the domain that much. Say when the guest checked out, the booking is done, right? There is no extension, nothing, right? In this case with booking, this is pretty easy. You just get a command to check out, you confirm that everything has been paid, and then you produce an event check, guest checked out, you close the booking. And basically you can, if you want, you can archive the stream or just truncate it, produce a summary event and truncate the stream. There is no mechanics just yet introduced to Eventus to support this, but it's doable. You can do it. It's possible. When it comes to things like closing the months, that's a bit outside of the thing that I built because it requires the external scheduling. And basically once a month for every account, and maybe for every account, no, for every open account, it needs to, like I would say, send a command out saying close the month for that account, and it will, and that command could be fan out, just but it needs to go to each individual account. I think it's just read through all of them. And then it's a synchronous process that would collect the, you have several balances, right? You have the book balance, the available balance, the opening balance on the previous period, and maybe even the list of transactions, booked transactions, not pending, maybe even pending transactions. You close it down to summary, and you can put it as an event, basically. The period closed. It depends on what you decide to do. You can say every period is a new stream, or you can close it as summary and say, I only keep the last summary and everything else goes to the archive. There are quite a few options there. But that's a very good thing because people often forget about that they don't deal with unlimited space on disk, right? It's like you need to keep your database full of operational data that you actually use rather than filling all the history in it, because sometimes people say, oh, event sourcing, we keep everything forever. No, that's not going to work anyway. If you have a system that's being used, it will grow unconditionally or unlimitedly, and then it will stop working. So understanding the life cycle of the entity is important, and then you can just one thing, in a bit on the side, I always not always, but I advocate for two things in the timeline. One is the point when you don't need it anymore for any purpose except of like, yeah, at all, right? Or you might be forced to delete it because like if you have received GDPR requests and doesn't have obligation to the, you don't have a legal ground to store this data anymore. You have to delete it, right? Then it's closed. Sometimes you say it's been so long and our agreement with the user that we keep their data for 3 years, 5 years, we just remove it because we don't want to pollute our system. It doesn't stop you from using some anonymized data for analytics purposes, but it should be outside of the event store. It should be somewhere in an analytical store. And there is another point that I haven't been aware of for quite a while until we figured it out. I call it the, so this is retention period, right? But also mutability period, I call it. But it's a period of time when the entity needs to be mutable. So it can be accepting new commands and producing new events. But it might be like, for example, when the account period is closed, it cannot accept new mutations, right? It's done. It's like a counting year. It can be reopened and then receive new mutations, closed again, submitted to as a tax report, but it's deliberate action. And these are indicators for you to do some manipulation of data. Let's say if I would build an accounting system, when a user closed the year, it becomes immutable, and I will pack it someplace and just store it as it is, you know, accessible fast, but I don't need it in the event store anymore, right? I can even archive events. I can just store them as they are, JSON or whatever. When the user reopens the year, I will put it back. And funny enough, putting events back to the operational database actually forces projections to be rebuilt. So even if you remove them out from all the projected databases, they will be brought back like a resurrection. Again, some magic.
Yeah. Yeah, I pasted also the link to my article, and we also had webinar, the one I did a rehearsal before my DDD Europe talk on our group. So I also mentioned those different strategies, and Derek Comartin has also nice video about that, about differentiation between hot, warm, cold storage, as he called it.
I think the closing the books stuff and snapshotting the article at Event Store website is pretty good as well. So maybe you can. Is that you posted?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
good.
the one.
I think it's the most comprehensive one that I've seen on the topic.
Thanks.
So I do have support for real-time archive, meaning that it basically split out events. It writes. You write events to the operational store, and there is a connector, which I didn't show this time, at least. It will shovel it somewhere else in the archive and storage that has tiers. It can be changed in some way. I don't know yet how to delay it, right? So it doesn't shovel everything. It shovels after a period of time. But the real time works as well. The point is, it's pretty easy to build keep the system alive with the archive until you start replaying, of course. Because when you read the stream, what I do, I read from the operational database. And all event stores that I have support the same semantics. So they have, if you read the stream, let's say it contains 5 events. I can actually show it. So let's say it's fully paid and it's the end of the life cycle. Oh, I can't do it, I think. Let me just try. Add event query metadata. No, it needs to be done on the in code. I can basically say truncate a stream at event number 2. And when I read the stream, I will get this one only, right? Let's say it's a summary event. Or it just continues its life cycle, like just keeps mutating. But if I want to read the full stream, I will read this one, and I'd say it's 3, but it's in the position 0, like it's the first event in the array that events returns. I said, okay, because of that, the stream has been truncated. So I need to check the archive, right? I go to the archive, I find these events there. I concatenate the collections together and do the distinct between them, because this one will be in both. And I can return the restored state, or the aggregate state, or whatever state, it's called state now, back. So you don't even notice, except of the delay, because it needs to go to 2 different databases, which is pretty cool. So I think there is a bit of work more that could support taking the, I don't like the word snapshots. I mean, snapshots are useful. I know quite a few systems that have been saved by technical snapshotting. I think they need to be approached with caution and much better use this business attributes like closing demands. But the biggest issue there is like events are kind of internal contract schema, right? So we have the, where is it? This one, we know that we change something there, that things might break. The state, as I said, is transit. We can freely change it, but as soon as we start snapshotting it, we will face impedance mismatch, because immutable array is not deserializable. It's serializable perfectly. That's why I can show it in Spyglass, but it doesn't serialize back. That's the thing. That's the first impedance mismatch that you can face using immutable array structures, for example. So that's why it requires some additional code to say, okay, given this particular instance of state, what do I need to store as a snapshot? And that's why in many cases it's better to produce an event and make it deliberate. So, because handling the snapshot is exactly like this, just add a line and say, this is how I apply this particular event of a special kind. It's the full snapshot of state. Yeah, so, but I want to build something for that. I think it can be useful.
Yeah, I
Now, the
agree.
snapshots can go to different places. One customer event stores, they actually struggle with reading long streams, and they added snapshotting, and they did a very smart thing. They store snapshot to the blob, which is very cheap. And they only store the latest version.
Mm.
And they don't truncate streams, they just keep reading, but they store in the snapshot, they store the version when of the stream where the snapshot was taken, so they read the tail of the stream always, which is quite fast because it's just in the latest chunk. You don't need to go back in time for like ages.
Yeah.
So, that I can build. Just need to figure out how to elegantly express the need that you need to extract the state and put it in the object that is deserializable. So.
Okay, so the last one. I'm working for a company that is building accounting software. Event sourcing sounds as right fit for the accounting, but when I think about having 3 billion events, that is how many accounting transactions we have in the prod table, spread across few million streams, then rebuilding projections or migrating streams can become tedious and long process.
Yeah, you just come online. I mean, we can discuss that. So my first question would be, all the streaming and transactions are like in open years and closed years. Because if this, I again talked to a pretty big customer event store, and I said, like, what is your operational data? And that you actually mutate the same, maybe 30%, maybe 20%. The rest is historical data.
Yeah.
So when they execute the replay, they replay in useless data that don't need even to show to anyone, right? This data is immutable. It can be captured in a relatively immutable store, right? So that's the thing, right? So you need to understand the immutability period. Like I said, if the immutability period is if the time period between the year was open, you cannot post transactions to the year that's not open yet. You cannot post transaction to the period that's not that is closed. You cannot even post transactions, like I cannot post an invoice for the closed VAT accounting period. I can do free transactions, just arbitrary accounts. I can do bank transactions, but I cannot post invoices anymore, because both inside a country and foreign invoices, they still have some VAT accounting in it. So I need to reopen the VAT period, release them, book an invoice back in time, and resubmit the correction to the tax authorities. The same goes with accounting year. So when the year is closed, then you submit a report. If you want a correction of a report, you open the period. There is a process behind, and then you have a retention period for the whole accounting thing. And some countries is 5 years, in some countries 7 years. And after that, the data can be removed. You basically have no obligation to keep it. Maybe you don't have a legal right to keep it, right? Because many people forget that. I looked at a database of government imposed fines on companies for violating GDPR, and most of the fines are imposed for processing the data or keeping the data without legal ground. So a lot of companies are in danger for GDPR violation because you just keep all the data. So these are periods that you need to look for. And putting out important data somewhere, like you can, this is the trick, right? So I keep saying about projections being transient and disposable, but sometimes it's a practical decision to just keep them, treat them as a piece of state, right? It's a normal database. You can compact the year to a series of events and store all these events for a year for a particular company in a blob, which will be maybe a few megabytes, but no more, because these transactions are small, right? External data like invoices that link to transactions, bank account reconciliations, that's a separate thing. Attachments, for example, you don't put in this blob, but transaction data you can put there. And then you have a projection, the read model, or not projection, read model that basically shows you the stuff. So you can always have two ways of, like, if I go to the open year, I go there. If I go to the archived year to close the year, I go over there. And when you open the year, you kill it there and you put it back, right? Like I said, if you uncompact the archived piece, it doesn't need to be a single stream. It might be a whole bunch of them. They can be automatically reprojected because they will appear like new events, and they put back and the year will just spin up. So you don't replay everything, you just replay a single year, which might be maybe a couple of minutes or even a few seconds, depending on the company size. But there are ways to solve it. You can also say my read model database contains everything. You just treat it like a precious thing. I would take backups and stuff like that. And then again, like for how long do you want to keep it? Does it require tier storage? Stuff like that, because Mongo has the archive feature, and then you just need to do something to, like, by Elastic says, okay, the age of the document, right? And it will be moved to the called tier. It saves costs. And keeping all the data in operation database is crazy, especially when you talk about volumes like that. It just eats up costs without bringing any benefit.
Yeah, I'm also naming that split to hot, warm, and cold, to transactional data, read model data, and audit data. It's also not precise, but it gives it gives more context to the usage and the lifetime. So transactional are all the data that you need to make your business decision. And this is, you rarely need to have a lot of data like that. And that probably you need to either keep all events for that or use summary event, as you said. For the read model data, you might not even need to keep those events that generated those read models. But as you said, just keep the read model data and that should be fine. And for audit, you just put it in some S3 or S3 Glacier as blobs and just keep it because you have to, and that's all.
Because many banks, they do a two-step process, right? So they close the period. So definitely you see that if you they send you a statement and it's closed, right? Nothing can happen. You will be very pissed if you see the statement coming 5 days after and say, "Oh, look at this! This is a meta statement. We're missing some transactions." So like your closing balance was 10,000 euros and now it's 1,000 euros. Like, where is the money gone? And if I look at my internet bank and I go like several months back in time, they show it in the list in the browser, right? But if I go even further back in time, they start showing me PDF files. So they basically compacted everything to PDF files, stored some blob. And if they archive those transactions, I don't really care. They should have done it because it's completely immutable. And the period of immutability is a very powerful thing, because then you can say my data is immutable, and storing immutable data is sometimes much easier than storing mutable data. And it often requires different techniques, different type of databases, stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay,
But
that was
if I'm looking at my last year, for example, in accounting system, I could easily imagine that they keep stuff in some reporting database that I can like draw the P&L, for example, a balance sheet, and they show me last year, and then, but they only show me this year and last year and the year before, but no more in that report. So I can't go really 5 years back in time, but I can open that year like to look at it, and I would not be surprised if they load a whole year from the blob to the machine memory just to serve my queries. Because how much data I have, I maybe have 2 megabytes or something.
yeah.
Max. I have, of course, a very small company. Maybe I have I don't know, 100K in my whole year, right? So if you think about the volumes, it might be just feed into memory and be served from there. So who knows? But it could be like if I search for something, it goes way back in time over the years, like some invoice by number. They might use Elasticsearch or something like that for this purpose with tier storage.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Okay, I think that we can call it a meeting. That was a long one. Thank you a lot, Alexey, for your time and for answering patiently all of our questions. And thanks for all that survived 2.5 hours with us. I really also appreciate that. And yeah. Alexey, do you want to have some final sentence, like besides just use Eventus?
No, I wouldn't say use Eventus, because I would say that you might, like Oscar said, if you have a problem, you might just look it up how I've done it. And so far, it has quite some of the advanced concepts implemented in code, and the code is not big. There are a lot of code that is not relevant for a lot of people. Like, let's say I have RabbitMQ messaging, Google PubSub messaging, and Kafka producers and stuff. You don't need all of it, right? Just choose and pick. I try to update the documentation. If you want to contribute, even like exchanging ideas, you find an issue and just don't sit in despair and complain, oh, Jesus Christ, doesn't work. Open an issue, we have a nice chat, and stuff like that. If you use Eventus for production, don't hesitate putting a couple of bucks every month. I mean, if you run a $3 million monthly revenue company, I think it's worth it, because it motivates me to move forward with that. So what else? If you have some ideas, just join the discussion. I have a channel on Discord that probably you advertise already. I have my own Slack workspace, which I don't know if I should keep. I have this ideas place, which is open to everyone to submit ideas, discussions in repositories. Maybe there are too many channels, I don't know. I haven't talked about a connector. I think it's pretty interesting. But I want to wrap up certain things first. Today I read about Akka projections, and they introduced gRPC projection. My idea.
Yeah.
So I do something like that, and I will do it. They did a simple one. I do it more advanced, but now I'm getting back to implement a simple one based on customer demand. So some next time, or yeah, some other day, I will probably show it. I started the YouTube channel. It's just, you know, some demos of things. I will be probably recording some of the getting started videos because I'm not good at writing text about getting started. I will try to cover it in some videos. So just go there, subscribe. I just started it last week, so it just has a single video, and I showed there what I showed you today, or much less than that, just 15 minutes.
Yeah, I will get all the links from you and post it on the Architecture Weekly page when I upload the video. And also, if you want, then feel free to share any links on our Discord channel. I don't mind, so feel free also to do that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, and yeah, I appreciate those who survived so long. So I think, is it the longest webinar you had?
Might be. I'm not sure. The one about modeling distributed process, I think, was like 2 hours and something, but I think that we might have the new record.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's like the fact that we had like 10 people or over 10 people, almost the whole webinar showed that, yeah, it was really intriguing and interesting.
Cool. Very good. So
Thank
guys,
you.
I'm still in Discord, so we can talk about things. But please ask questions in public. I like public discussions because then other people just can contribute. I'm not very good at one-on-one because I end up repeating things.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye. Bye.